I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us. Dr. Honigsfeld, I am so excited to have this conversation with you. I have spent an enormous amount of my life fruitlessly trying to learn French, and so I want you to help me learn how to learn French. But I also work in schools where a majority of students, or a large number of students, are acquiring new language. I'm also fascinated by collaboration, partnership. So you've published over 31 books, but many of them talk about those things, acquiring language and collaboration, co-teaching. So I'm excited to talk about those two things. And I know I'm going to learn a lot, and I'm going to learn about something I really want to learn about. So I'm really grateful for your time today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm very, very passionate about language development, language acquisition, language learning, as well as collaboration, as you mentioned.
Well, 31 books, you got to be passionate, because I don't know how you could pump out 31 books in as young as you are and put that all out. It's pretty astonishing. I think I've got about 10, and that took a long time. So 31, holy smokes. So that's what an accomplishment.
Well, I can tell you my secret: collaboration. Very few of those books are solo authored. Just about all of my books are about collaboration, or they're co-edited volumes. I have about 9 of them that are co-edited, so featuring other people's research and practitioner-oriented essays, documentary accounts. So there's a lot of collaboration that I practice, not just write about collaboration.
Oh, that's great. You collaborate to write about collaboration, to discuss collaboration. So if you could, maybe for those people who don't know much about you or don't know your story, could you tell us about your story? How did you come to write about collaboration, co-teaching for dual language learners?
Well, I was born and raised in Hungary, and also began my teaching career in Hungary. That's where the accent comes from, in case somebody's wondering about that. And that's never going to go away, since we're going to talk about language acquisition.
Well, mine's from Canada, so it's okay. We're good with accents.
We all have our accents. So Hungary was such a formative experience for me, not just because I grew up there as a child and as a young adult, but also because it's a collectivistic culture. Just like much of the rest of the world, unlike the United States or Western Europe or some other cultures which are more individualistic. So growing up in a collectivistic culture and becoming a teacher, being initiated into the field in a collectivistic culture, also meant that I collaborated. I collaborated during my student teaching. I collaborated during my initial years as a middle school English as a foreign language teacher, EFL. That was our title at that time. So sitting in the teacher's lounge, which was actually a workroom, not a lounge, but an opportunity for us to collaborate, to co-plan. It was second nature. I didn't know any other way to become a teacher. So when I came to the United States, it was quite natural for me to be one of the first co-teachers in the New York City public school system in the 1990s. And because I had a visionary principal, Carol Wertheimer, who was wondering about what ESL is doing. That was our title at that time, English as a Second Language. What are we doing, pulling out the kids, taking them downstairs to the basement or to all of these hidden little nooks, wherever we could find space for our English learners? So that pull-out system was something that she critically investigated very early on, when that wasn't yet an issue for much of society or the field of education. So that's why I put a date on that. So the early 1990s, when the special education inclusion model was really taking off. So the same thing occurred to Ms. Wertheimer to be considered for English learners. At that time, we called them English learners, ESL students. So there was a very different terminology going around. So I'm using the terminology that's appropriate to that time frame, not what we would be using today. But that's my origin story. So I became a practitioner first in a collaborative setting, both internationally and in the United States.
Wonderful. Well, let's talk about those words. So I remember English ESL teachers was a term we used, and then English language learners, dual language, multilinguistic, are they all the same? Do they all refer to the same students? And which is your preferred one and why? That's what I would ask about that terminology.
Well, some people might use them interchangeably. I think there is an important difference between and among these phrases. So the original terminology in lots of federal documents, which we totally did away with, was LEP, L-E-P, Limited English Proficient Student. So we wanted to remove the deficiency to come first and foremost, and started switching to a more asset-based terminology. That's how English learners came about. But even that privileged English language rather than recognizing the amazing talents and assets and gifts that the students are coming to school with, which is their bilingual, multilingual identities. So that's when emergent bilingual, EB, was introduced by Ofelia Garcia and many others. So we had this terminology struggle going on for a long time. The most current terminology that I fully embrace is multilingual learners, because that shows that our students have multiple linguistic repertoires, multiple linguistic tools at their fingertips. Right. And dual language learners are uniquely labeled or identified within a program model, the goal of which is for the students to develop language literacy and also learn core content in two languages. So that is more unique to a particular program model. And they could include English dominant or primarily English speakers who are adding on a new language, as opposed to, let's say, Spanish or Russian or Polish or any other speakers who are learning English at the same time.
I've used multilinguistic, but I'm already learning. So multilingual sounds better than multilinguistic. And for the reasons you said, to me, this student already knows one language and now they're learning a new language. They're actually, if anybody's one up, it's the student who already knows one language is learning a second language, as opposed to they just don't know how to do English, Which gets to the next thing I wanted to ask about is, as I mentioned, now I'm Canadian. I'm a dual citizen now, but I grew up in Canada. I feel as a Canadian that I should speak both official languages, French and English. And I can get by. As I always say, I can ask for something. I just don't know if I'm going to get it or not. And I do a lot of nodding when people are talking in French, having no idea what I'm hearing. But there's still a communication taking place. I can get by with someone who doesn't speak English. But I couldn't teach. I couldn't do a podcast in French. I'm nowhere near where I want to be. So what advice do you have for me on how I can improve my French, how I can become more fluent in this language I really want to learn?
So as an adult, your language development might differ to some degree to what our students experience in the
Right.
K-12 setting, but I'm focusing on your question. What can you do to be a more proficient French speaker? By the way, I'm studying my 7th language. I'm studying finally, very, very late to the game, but finally I'm studying Spanish. I should have picked it up a long, long time ago, but life happens and other things take precedence. So some tips that I would give to an adult learner, especially educators who might want to use their language skills with families and with students, is to take a look at language acquisition and language learning in an interconnected way. So let me clarify that. So language acquisition happens in that natural way of you interact with somebody, you listen to how they respond back to you, and you start literally emulating some of those linguistic features. You just heard that they used a different term. Maybe they introduced an idiom in their speech, and you naturally acquire that. You might be also naturally acquiring their intonation. You're hearing some distinct ways that they pronounce words, and you try to integrate that kind of learning into your own practice. So that I would refer to as language acquisition. Language learning is more traditionally sitting down, carefully looking at some grammatical structures, adding more vocabulary to your repertoire, looking up some word meanings, some nuances. So you're intentionally focusing on what are the features of that particular target language, French for you, that you want to improve. So when you combine the two, the language acquisition, which is the authentic practice of using language. So the more you do that, the more you put yourself in some kind of context in which you have to use language authentically without second guessing yourself, without being hard on yourself that you made a mistake. Well, that's what language is all about. I probably already mispronounced the 3 words since we started this podcast, or maybe more, but that's not going to slow me down. I'm going to keep using language to the best of my ability and take a lot of risks, struggle or embrace that notion of tolerance for ambiguity, that I don't know everything about this language, but I'm going to keep using it and keep being functional and intentional and at the same time authentic with my language use. And on the flip side of that, I also want to be very focused on building up the language that I'm learning as a system, because it's a system, it's a rule-governed system. If you think about it, the grammatical rules, anything from spelling to pronunciation to syntax, pragmatics, all those different layers of linguistics are all part of knowing the language. So when you combine language acquisition and language learning, I like to refer to language development. That's how you get to where you want to be at the next stage or the next phase of your language proficiency.
So if I can convince my wife to move to Paris for 6 months, it's not going to happen. But if I could, that would really accelerate my French language acquisition.
It would, but more on that authentic side, if you really wanted to balance it out that with that kind of intentional studying the language, then the two together, that intentionality, the explicit learning of the language combined with authentic use is what I would recommend to you. If you would still go to classes too, hopefully, or you would maybe have a private tutor who would help you, guide you through different aspects of the target language where he or she would find a particular area of need.
That sounds good. So how are you going about learning Spanish, and how long do you think it'll take you to get to where you're satisfied with where you are?
Well, it's going to take...
I know you're a special case, but I'm just curious.
I'm a special case. Yeah, so, well, I am maybe a special case just because growing up in Europe, learning languages was the norm. Everybody is multilingual. So it's not something that is looked at as a unique phenomenon, because we started learning second and third languages in elementary school rather than waiting to start learning in the secondary level, at the secondary level. There's also the critical period hypothesis that we have to mention quickly here by Steve Krashen, who talks about this notion of how when you hit pre-puberty, after that language acquisition changes. It doesn't mean that you cannot continue learning and developing competence in multiple languages, but that near native fluency, if there is such a thing at all, because that's being debated a lot, to have native language fluency as a benchmark. There are multiple forms and competencies with every language that we have to embrace. So how long is it going to take me to learn Spanish? I'm not sure. What are my goals with this? I want to be communicative. I'm learning through Duolingo and also trying to practice it authentically with Spanish-speaking individuals. And I've been recently invited to work in a particular school district within the dual language context. And some of the teachers felt more comfortable speaking in Spanish during the workshop. And what happened in October compared to what happened in March when I went back, even the teachers noticed that my Spanish has improved. My comprehension has improved dramatically. So I just have to put myself more and more in context in which Spanish is a meaningful opportunity for me to be used.
Yes, and one last question along this line. What's the advantage of learning more than one language? What are the benefits of it? You have 7, so you must feel there's some benefits.
Well, I have studied 7. I'm not claiming that I actually have fluency or full proficiency with 7, but the excitement of figuring out a linguistic system, that's one thing for me. The other is just transferring understanding from one language to the other is quite fascinating. My favorite area is idioms and proverbs and unique ways that members of a particular linguistic group see the world. So I'll give you one example. I'm having a really hard time with these violent idioms, such as killing two birds with a stone.
Right.
In Hungarian, it is you kill two flies with a slap. So it's just like all these kinds of similarities and differences in how we express certain ideas, certain thoughts are fascinating to me linguistically and culturally. Other advantages are just simply being able to say hello in the language or the languages that, let's say in the school context, our students speak or our families speak. If you said anything to me in Hungarian, it goes straight to my heart because I know you or anybody who speaks with me had one Hungarian connection or maybe one visit to Hungary, and you would know that it's Budapest, not Budapest, like how to pronounce the capital of the country correctly. So it is so emotionally fulfilling to be able to connect with people through languages that I will, I think, continue to learn languages as long as I can.
That's a really great point, because when I try my stumbling in French with people when I'm traveling in Quebec or traveling in France, it is a whole different, especially if I meet someone in America who speaks French and I speak in French, you can see them just kind of light up until they realize I don't know what I'm doing, and then it's a bit of a problem. But anyway, and I do feel too texts, it's wonderful to be able to read a text in the original language of the little bit that I know, because it's just different. It's just translation is not the same as reading something in French for me. So given all that you've said about language acquisition, how does that translate into what teachers can do in the classroom to help students learn more effectively, more fluent, more efficiently?
I think what I mentioned about the combination of explicit teaching and learning, as well as authentic opportunities for language use, should apply to the classroom as well. What do I mean by that? Students will pick up the language. I think this is colloquially very well known that, yes, they pick up language. But what do they pick up? They pick up slang. Sometimes they pick up language chunks such as, can I go to the bathroom? They just learn the whole phrase because they know that that's the way that they can leave the classroom. So that's picking up. But that's not enough. They cannot pick up academic discourse. They cannot pick up the highly specific vocabulary within a math problem. So we need to explicitly teach language that's needed for them to be successful in the context of schooling, in the context of their education. And at the same time, create classroom environments and language and literacy learning opportunities in which they use the language authentically. So while I firmly believe in scaffolding, such as providing sentence frames or creating multimodal opportunities for input, multisensory access to learning, such as watching a video and then also reading about the same topic. So now we have multiple sources of input, multiple channels of input. Learning will take place when that's also authentic and the kids can internalize both the content and the language at the same time. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to engage in a conversation with my classmate, or maybe it's writing an authentic letter to a community member about a local issue that the kids truly care about. So how to add authentic opportunities into language and literacy development is critical for multilingual learners. And a final comment about it that I'd like to add is always just circling back to that notion of looking at the students through that asset-based lens, rather than deficient or deficit-oriented lens of what they don't have, what they don't know, what they can't do yet. Instead, focusing on what can they do in their home language or primary language, what can they do in English, what can they do through these kinds of multimodal forms of expression.
You're making me think of Julie Stern, who talks about the difference between acquisition, connection, and transfer. And so what I'm hearing you say in my own kind of simplistic way of understanding it is that it's really the transfer that you're striving for. You still have to acquire understanding of grammar, memorization of vocabulary, but the really important part is transfer. And when I use it is the idea that that then it stays with me. When I've used it a few times, it's like deeper in my memory somehow.
Yes. Yeah. I think this is really important what you just said, that I like to use the bicycle or the swimming metaphor. That if
Mm.
the teacher is doing all the talking in the most beautiful English or whatever the target language is, the teacher is going to get very, very good at public speaking and explaining difficult concepts to the kids. But the kids will have to use the language so that
Mm.
they get better. So they have to get on that bicycle, not just watch the teacher riding the bicycle, or they will have to jump in the pool and not just watch the Olympic swimmers beautifully gliding through the water. So it's getting into the authentic context of learning and being able to transfer learning. Or from the world of linguistics, I would talk about being on the receptive or receiving end or the
Mm.
interpretive end. That's our new WIDA terminology. If I listen to you, I'm receiving input. I am interpreting what you said or what I watched or what I read, but it stops there. And that's not enough. We have to look at the flip side, which used to be called productive language skills when I produced the language, or more recently, it's referred to as expressive language skills. So when we combine all of these domains or modes of communication, and as teachers, because you asked about the transfer to the classroom, when
Right.
educators are very mindful to make sure that English learners, multilingual learners, or all learners for that matter, have opportunities to practice language across all domains or modes of communication. That's how you're going to develop language. So getting back to your French example, Jim, so what if you also practiced all of your modalities? So do you listen, speak, read, write? Do you watch movies in French, maybe with or without English subtitles? So expanding your way of practicing French through multimodalities, multisensory, multimodal, multi-dimensional opportunities.
I don't write very much, so that's really a valuable tip. I'm quick to use Google Translate to help me write in French, and people will write back and say your French is very good, and I'm like, yeah, that's because I use Google Translate. But I think writing more that's one way of doing it, and well, all the things you said are really helpful ways to move forward. And it's interesting what you're saying doesn't just apply to English language learners or multilingual learners. It would seem to me that these ideas about transfer apply to all learners, as you said.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Actually, if I could just give Ivania Soto huge nod of appreciation and acknowledgement, because she introduced the term ALL. Instead of ELL or MLL, she talks about academic language learners.
Mm-hmm.
Even your highly gifted monolingual student is going to be learning a huge amount of vocabulary through their academic careers. They're going to use language quite differently in the context of a classroom compared to what they do on the playground or in the cafeteria or at home. So being more intentional about infusing language and literacy into every classroom, every content area is beneficial for all students, not just for our recently arrived newcomers or multilingual learners, English learners.
It makes me wonder if we spend more time concerned with transfer and maybe a little less time concerned with standardized tests that are probably measuring acquisition. What would be the difference if we really focus on can the students actually use and apply and whatever it is they're learning? That's another podcast. So
Okay.
you have these co-words: collaboration, co-teaching. I'm assuming that co-teaching is a form of collaboration. Do I have that right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
what would you say are, and of course, collaboration is a big part of what instructional coaches do. What are some principles that should guide us as we collaborate with others? What principles would help us to be more effective collaborators? Maybe beliefs or just ways of being as we approach other people in collaboration.
So within the context of my research and publications, I focus on classroom teachers, K-12, content teachers, general educators sometimes. So I don't like the term, but we have all of these other labels that I'm struggling with too, how they can collaborate with specialists. who come in with their specialized areas of expertise, such as English language development, or special education, or even gifted education. So in that context, collaboration, the main principle of collaboration for me is partnership building. And that partnership building refers to the fact that you and I forge a professional relationship for the sake of serving the student. So it's not about you, it's not about me, it's about us. How can we be more impactful, more effective with our students? And we have to leave our egos at the door. We have to leave some of those baggages that we might carry with us at the door, or bring those issues into open conversations, not sweeping anything under the door, but forging a partnership, spending time and effort on how to make sure that we have relational trust, as well as shared goals and shared pathways to success. So that takes time, that partnership building, figuring out what are those shared goals and shared understandings, where are the overlapping philosophies and practices that we bring to the table to better serve our multilingual learners is at the core of my work.
Well, we can't really collaborate if I'm not open to hearing what you have to teach me. Yes. If I'm showing up just to tell and not listen. And my friend Christian Van Nuremberg, his mantra as a coach is, it's not about me. And I think when you look at trust, that idea of it's not about me is one of the things that fosters trust. What damages trust when it's all about me? So that's and partnership is our core metaphor for coaching. In a similar vein, what are some of the essential skills for people to be effective collaborators?
I think you mentioned already this notion of listening to each other. So being able to keep an open mind. So I specifically teach some listening skills when I coach teachers to collaborate better. And one of them is to paraphrase. Jim, I think I heard you say that, and then I finished the sentence paraphrasing what you just said, showing you that I'm staying with your ideas rather than already pushing my own ideas. The second really important skill is to ask clarifying questions, to continue to stay with your ideas rather than already in my head formulating the comeback. What am I going to say before you have even finished your thought? So if I ask a question, could you tell me more about that notion of it's not about me? Could you tell me more about that framework that you just mentioned? Because I'm not familiar with that. So rather than already I'm giving you my examples one after the other, I'm still with your ideas, with your original ideas. So this is one way that we can enhance partnership building. We can enhance trust building, as well as that open-mindedness that I'm not the holder of all the knowledge. We have very different areas of expertise and skill sets. And how can we combine those skills to be better collaborators for the sake of multilingual learners? Often I'd like to also build capacity around collaboration. So we build capacity for collaboration through collaboration. You have to practice collaborating to get better at collaboration. So having, just starting small, one collaborative conversation around a multilingual learner's portrait. Who is this child? Can we get to know the child? Can we find out their backstory? Where do they come from? Can we learn 10 phrases in their home language? So the next time they come to the class, we're going to welcome this child in that language. So building shared understanding, shared skill set, shared knowledge and understanding is also a big part of starting off on the right foot with collaboration.
I love it. I think that's super fascinating. And I think this is the heart of what our work is how do you interact? I love, Amanda Ripley wrote about this, but other people have written about it, but the idea of asking the question, do I have that right? That's after you paraphrase. That simple question has been like gold for me. And when you have it right, you kind of click into alignment. And when you don't have it right, But I was thinking, well, then you can clarify, but I was thinking, I think sometimes when there's communication between two people, what's happening is the speaker at the time isn't sure if they're being clear, and the listener doesn't want to look dumb, for lack of better terms. So they don't want to ask any clarifying questions because they're like, I should really be understanding this, but I'm kind of confused. And so people hesitate to speak up, and sometimes to speak clear. But I actually think if you're not clear, then you ask the clarifying questions. I don't think you look less intelligent by asking a clarifying question. I think, besides what's the point of a conversation where you don't understand? But I think we naturally are a little hesitant to ask for clarification for fear we might look like we should have got it, but we're not getting it. But if we step up and ask the clarifying question, maybe the person wasn't clear, but it's going to be a way better conversation. I actually know what the person's saying. So, and it's validating, it's letting them know we're with them, I think. So that's a great point.
Absolutely.
So to be more specific about our co-words, tell me a few things I need to know about co-teaching. I've understood co-teaching in the context of special education. So I'm wondering if that's the context you're talking about, or is it something bigger than that? So what have you found is important for us? I know we're 31 books and we're trying to summarize this in like 3 minutes, but what would you say is important for co-teaching?
So what I like to say about co-teaching is that we build on prior years of both tremendous expertise, research, practice, and also maybe some missteps that took place in special education. So when we transfer the concept of collaboration and co-teaching to the English language development or ELD or dual language context, we build on those strengths, assets, powers, precedents from special education. But it's also very different because there is no deficiency here. There is no, not something that we would have to fix. We're in the business of construction. We're building a new language. So rather than thinking about collaboration and co-teaching as some form of remediation, we're actually closer to gifted education, and we focus on acceleration. So that's often a new concept that I introduce to educators, that our multilingual learners need to make more than a year's progress in a year to catch up to a moving target, and accelerated curricula, accelerated learning come from gifted education. So let's treat our multilingual learners as linguistically gifted students, and let's collaborate and create a learning environment for acceleration. So how can we look at the curriculum, identify? So when it comes to collaboration, it is back mapping, looking at the curriculum, what we have already taught, or forward mapping, looking ahead, what is coming up in the curriculum. That can be accelerated or compacted. What is the essential learning that a child or a group of students absolutely need to take part in to be able to accelerate their content and language development? So that is a very different kind of conversation than what are they missing? How are we filling those gaps? We're not talking about gaps. We're talking about an accelerated trajectory. So that gets teachers very excited that, oh, that's very different from special education. The second big difference is that usually special education co-teaching takes place during the entire day, or at least part of the day. Within the context of English language development, ELD, it might not be more than a single period, even if it's a double period a day. So there's a lot less time for the specialist to work with a content teacher, with a classroom teacher. So we need to be even more intentional about maximizing the time that the two educators can spend together, both planning and then co-delivering instruction. And then sometimes co-delivering, that co-teaching, if it's defined as co-delivering instruction, is not even feasible because you don't have enough specialists. Or in the dual language context, there are two teachers who are teaching the two partner languages, and they never co-deliver, they parallel teach, and then they swap classes, or there are all kinds of configurations for dual language education, but they rarely co-deliver instruction. So I like to refine some of these concepts of what is co-planning when you look at the curriculum, unit planning, lesson planning, and you not just simply share an existing lesson plan and ask your colleague to now make this more feasible or more doable for English learners, like fix it up. That's not co-planning. Co-planning is when we start out with shared goals, shared objectives. We're going to pay attention to content and language and literacy development simultaneously. That's where the acceleration happens. When we are very intentional how we align what are the content goals and what are the language and literacy goals that match, that align. So we have to do it together. You don't have to co-teach to co-plan. This is a really important motto of my life. I wrote a book with Maria Dove under this motto that you don't have to co-teach to co-plan, but you cannot co-teach without co-planning. So co-planning is for everybody who works with multilingual learners. And of course, we have other dimensions, co-assessment and reflection. So positioning this work within a cyclical pattern, co-plan, co-teach, co-assess, and co-reflect, is one framework that I have adapted from the world of special education to concentrated, aligned content and language development.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I'm probably not listening as well as I should because I'm thinking, but you're making me think. I'm blaming you, but
okay.
So 1 + 1 should be more than 2.
Ooh, that's one of my lines too. I love that.
Well, I just picked it up through you intuitively because I just thought it, but often collaboration, at least when two people come to talk, it's actually 1 + 1 is less than 1, because what I'm trying to do is convince you of my opinion, not hearing your opinion, and vice versa. Or maybe I'm just going to tell you what to do. And it's much better if it's 1 + 1 equals at least 2 or more than 2, because they're learning from each other and collaborating, as opposed to me just trying to talk you into what you need to do. So, but that's your phrase too?
Yes, because I see collaboration as being highly co-generative, so that we're creating something new that hasn't been there yet. So we're not just putting together that this is what Jim knows, this is what Andrea knows, and then it's 1 + 1 equals 2. But if we combine our expertise, then we're creating something new that hasn't been there yet, such as this conversation. It has never been there yet. And the way we're exchanging ideas, and you're enhancing my understanding through the many, many references that you already gave in this short conversation. So we're creating something new that hasn't been there yet. And that's what I often emphasize around how fluid and powerful collaboration can be.
That is a great phrase, highly co-generative. So I think that's a wonderful way of describing what we would call the partnership approach to coaching. I really, really love that phrase. And here I thought my 1 + 1 was mine, but I'm going to reference you and give you credit for it.
No, I think it's ours. How about that?
All right. So given all you know, and you've already said many things that would be helpful to coaches, but are there a few suggestions, tips, strategies, ideas you've got about how coaches could be more effective?
Yes. So when I have the unfortunately rare, not very frequent opportunity, since I do a million things to coach teachers, I transfer the same asset-based approach to working with educators that we would want to apply to multilingual learners. And that's really, really important to me, because my experience has been in the past 20 plus years is that educators are very hard on themselves, especially when it comes to multilingual learners. If they just say, I don't know what to do with these kids, that's already an indication that they don't believe in themselves, that they don't have the skill set, when in fact they do. But they other, as a verb, they other those kids, that they are different, they need something else. I have to have a whole different lesson plan or a whole different skill set to be able to work effectively with multilingual learners. So I often tell them that if we agree that we have an asset-based approach to working with multilingual learners, let's also agree that we have an asset-based approach to working with teachers who work with multilingual learners. So my approach is to always look for what is there already and build on that. Let's say if they focus on vocabulary, which every teacher focuses on vocabulary, then let's just refine that understanding. How does vocabulary develop? How do kids retain vocabulary? What works? What are those go-to strategies, and how can those be enhanced? So I always go with that mindset of how to get the teachers to fully embrace and appreciate their own strengths so that they could build on that and feel affirmed that, oh yeah, I know what to do. This is another child. Every English learner, multilingual learner is first and foremost a general education student. We're not othering them or pulling them aside or sending them out of the classroom and then they will come back when they are fixed. That's not the model that we want. So they belong in that classroom and they thrive in a classroom that's rich in academic language. Teachers teach academic language already. So that's my number one recommendation to coaches is intentionally look for entry points of what the teachers are doing very well in support of language, in support of literacy development, and more specifically for multilingual learners.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this conversation? Given your 31 books and the limited amount of time, what have we not talked about you think is really important?
Well, we haven't talked about co-assessment too much, and I'm just excited about that because my next book is going to be on co-assessment with Dr. Margot Gottlieb. So we did the same thing. We combined our expertise. She is one of the most recognized gurus of assessment, and she reached out to me. We wrote a chapter together. We've been practicing some co-presentations and some other ways of collaborating. And now we said we have to write a book together to show very practical ideas around collaborative assessment for the sake of multilingual learners, English learners, dual language learners. And it's connected to co-planning. How can you co-plan? How can you plan? And especially, how can you co-plan if you're not looking at data or the phrase that we prefer, evidence of student learning jointly? Because we're going to look at the same evidence, whether it's a piece of student rating or maybe an oral language sample, something that the student is able to produce, through at least two lenses. The content angle, are they meeting the core content standards? And then the language and literacy angle, are they also developing the aligned language and literacy features of that core content area? So that's just in a nutshell what's coming very soon in October.
Well, in October, our book on data is coming out called Data Rules. And so we're in alignment here once again, because we would say you need to gather data to figure out if what I'm doing is working. You have to see, is it effective or not? So we can try these new strategies, try these new things, but it's not just a matter of trying something. We need to have some kind of objective standard of excellence. Is it working or is it not working? And too often it's almost like a GPS that only tells you when you arrive. There's no sense of, are we on track or off track? Do we have to make adjustments? And usually when you start, you're off track. So you need data to help you know, are we on track or off? What adjustments do we have to make? What do we need to do? What's working? What can we change? So once again, we're in line. I've loved this co-generative conversation. I've changed as a human being. Co-generation is a way. I like the term mutually humanizing. It's a term I've used, but I think when it comes to ideas, co-generation is a great thing. And dialogue trumps monologue every time. So I think that's the way to go. Thank you so much for the conversation. I loved it so much. I learned so much. And now I'm going to practice writing my French. I'm looking for a tutor. And I might even watch a few French movies because, they're pretty good. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.